Hi there, I'm Jeff Jackson, and I've made this video for you so you can see what I look and sound like, as well as what the speech would sound like, to give you an idea, since I didn't have a way of actually sending you the speech. So let's begin. I'm here to talk about writing and delivering a humorous eulogy. I think we need to have a serious talk with whoever invented the English language and ask them, why do we say a eulogy instead of an eulogy? After all, any noun that begins with a vowel is supposed to be preceded by an. I didn't make the rules, but I digress. We are here because someone has passed away, and as it turns out, that is the first step in the process which I will describe for you as writing and delivering the humorous eulogy. Our brother passed away several months ago, quite unexpectedly. And as a family, we chose the funeral arrangements. Since I gave the eulogies for my dad and my other brother, I volunteered to give the eulogy. Our brother-in-law also gave a speech at the funeral service, which was quite excellent, I might add, but did not have the personal touch that mine did. Plus, being a comedy writer, I thought I would honor my brother by not being too serious with my speech. I could easily have stood there and cried for 10 minutes and recite how special my brother was, etc., 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 but I felt that would not honor him or his memory or me. So I added some humor. Not jokes per se, but humorous observations or perceptions. And everything I say now are based on the process I followed for my brother. And if I cry along the way, please forgive me. These steps are overall guidelines, as are most guidelines for writing. We are not going to make fun of the deceased or the process. What we're doing here is providing signposts for you to consider on your path to writing a eulogy. You will use all of these, though your situation may need to adapt the direction or signposts. Humor is one of those things that everyone knows when they see it or hear it, but everyone has their own sense of humor and what they find amusing. Consider if you ask people what their favorite comedy movie is, you will get very different answers from everyone. We will examine humor a little more closely when we get to that step. We will look at and discuss what to write, how to add some humor to it, and then getting feedback on it. We will conclude with some final thoughts on the process. Please excuse me for saying we all the time, for saying you, okay? I'm taking some liberties with the language for the sake of presenting the material, not intending to disrespect anybody or anything, or you or me or we or us or I. And I say we in place of I because it sounds so presumptuous and full of myself to say I too much. There's nothing more humbling than to be face to face with death in whatever form it is. Let's get started. Step 1, death. Really, there's no place to go but up from here. Listen, let me take this opportunity to say a couple of things before we get too involved in this thing and lose all sense of time and space. First, you can easily spend all your time crying about the wonderful person who is not with you and us anymore. And you will cry, and you'd better cry, and if you don't cry, you aren't really human. The important part is that you do it, or you will end up besides what's his or her name in the casket. But once you do it, that is the grieving process. You'll feel better, though you'll probably also feel the loss forever anyway. And second, that what's his or her name is not the primary audience for your eulogy for obvious reasons. You are the audience as well as the speaker, and that person's family and friends are also the audience. This eulogy speech is for you. Of course, you'll want to honor his or her memory with what you say, and we'll get into that, but you want to honor them and you and your memory too. For further advice about the psychological effects of grieving, please consult a licensed professional. But Jeff, tell us how to write jokes. Well, you're not ready yet. That part is coming. Part 2, know your audience. This step has been around as long as there have been audiences. If you were talking to a group of orthodontists, you would not pick electromagnetism as your topic. What would you say? Whenever I want to find a direction to somewhere, I just use my braces to find true north? You talk to the people who are closest to the deceased. You get plenty of ideas to include in your talk. But keep in mind that if you talk to people and they give you all these really cool historical events they shared with the recently deceased, they may be expecting you to actually use them in your speech. And if you don't use their little anecdotes, you'll be able to safely say, I tried to work it in, but just couldn't quite make it, and they won't get all hurt over you not using that cute little story. If you talk to a lot of people, you may get a lot of good stories, and that's a better problem to have than not having enough and not saying to yourself, what am I going to say? I would bet a lot of you are thinking and are saying that right now. But Jeff, tell us how to write jokes. Well, you're not ready yet. That part is coming. Step 3, beginning, middle, and end. This step has also been around almost since forever, but comes to us through that jester of original thought, Aristotle. In general, your speech will be broken down into about 10 to 20% for the beginning and end sections, and 60 to 80% for the middle. Another way to look at it is that the beginning section tells the audience what you are going to talk about, the middle tells them, and the end tells them what you just told them in a summary form. The boundaries or percentages are not absolute or unbreakable. This speech itself follows those guidelines. You may be surprised, especially if you have not done any writing at all, that as you begin to assemble stories and anecdotes and things you must say, that these things will begin to fall into place and you will get a feel for it. Contrary to popular belief, writing is not like working an algebraic equation. Your pieces to the speech will fit together as you feel it. That doesn't mean that you won't follow the rules of writing. It's just that those rules are not set in concrete as your speech won't be. With experience in writing, you will feel your way through the process faster and more efficiently. But Jeff, tell us just how to write jokes. Well, you're not ready yet. That part is coming. Step 4, the life of. At some point, you will want to add the personal story of the dearly departed, which would include milestones, accomplishments, major life events, etc. You will probably not go through the entire life of the individual because it would be too tedious to write or speak or listen to. Nobody wants to hear Jeff was in first grade, was too late to his class Christmas pageant and got so upset he wet himself. Well, okay, that might be somewhat of a milestone, but nobody would appreciate it or care what Jeff did or didn't do in first, 4th, or 12th grade, or any detailed description of his life year by year. Like, then in 2001 this happened, and then 6 months later this happened, followed by this and that and this and that. Yuck. Get on with it. Depending on your relationship to the deceased, you'll probably only be able to come up with a million things. Plus, when you talk to other family members or friends, you'll have another million things. You'll have to whittle down these millions of things until you have a few prominent or important ones which reflect the life of the departed. Plus, you will have your own personal anecdotes, stories, stuff you want to say about your relationship that will honor their memory and yours too. You could include statements about their career, family, interests, hobbies, possessions, like if they had a 2012 Harley Roadster or something like that, whatever. For instance, my brother was close to me on most of my major life events, and he helped me numerous times in my life. I elaborated on some of those times in my speech, but not here. He was a teacher most of his life, loved playing handball, and his favorite movie was Old Yeller. Go figure. This section will probably provide the basis of your structure for your speech. Most people base their eulogies on the deceased timeline, birth, life, and death, which are just like beginning, middle, and end. Get it? But Jeff, just tell us how to write jokes. Well, you're not ready yet. That part is coming. Step 5, rough draft. Yes, you heard that correctly. It is time to start putting all these things down on paper. Okay, the humor part is the next step. But first, you have to have something to work with. Nobody who writes anything writes the first or rough draft perfectly. The writing process doesn't work like that. Writing is rewriting. One of the greatest misconceptions people have about writers is that the words literally flow out of the writer's mouth into the page directly, perfectly, the first time. It don't work that way. Pardon my English. This is especially true for comedy writers. Some of the more experienced comedy writers can write their rough draft better or faster than others, but even they have to rewrite. And to rewrite, you need to have something written. I will say that of all the steps I present today, I've actually used I have actually used. I wrote, I rewrote, I even added something moments before I went to the podium and began speaking. But I could do that because I'm immensely more experienced than you. Notice I didn't say better. Your better will come, but you have to work at it. So start putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Another little trick that I and many writers use is to actually read it out loud. You will get a feel for what works and what doesn't, and what order is better once you start working with the material and once you start hearing it. Practice makes better. I would say practice makes perfect, but in this case, nobody is expecting or even wants perfect. Everybody's going through the grieving process, and it is a highly emotional state right now. But with going through a material and organizing it and rewriting it and practicing the delivery, you become more comfortable with it, which essentially will allow you to get through it and will allow the audience to honor and remember the deceased with dignity. That's about as close to perfection as you're going to get under the circumstances. Yes, I practiced. Yes, I read aloud. Yes, I broke down, at least in the rehearsals. I would not be surprised if you did too, but my goal was to do honor to my brother, not only in what I said, but how I said it, the delivery, which is a good segue into the next step. But Jeff, tell us how to write jokes. Okay, you're ready. Step 6, humor. Essentially, there are two major components to comedy. They are what you say and how you say it. What you say. We are not going to advocate joke telling like a priest, a rabbi, and a Buddhist monk walk into a bar. Unless the deceased was a priest, a rabbi, or a Buddhist monk, and they really liked that joke, and everybody knew they really liked that joke. Also, and probably most importantly, this is not an occasion to just be joke telling because nobody would appreciate that. However, by adding some humor along the way, people will feel honored and true to life. Life is really full of comedy and drama. Both of these allow us to feel alive ourselves and alive with and through others. Humor provides a connection. What I'm going to talk about are some very simple concepts in comedy which you can use to lighten up your speech. I also use humor and comedy interchangeably, but you're relatively intelligent people like me most of the time, so I know you can handle it. Humor broken down is what makes us laugh, and what prompts that display is surprise. Consider your favorite stand-up comedian. The joke comes from the fact that you were expecting one thing from their statement, and they say something completely different from what you were expecting. This is known as the premise and payoff. The premise is the setup or the opening statement. Consider the famous joke from Henny Youngman. He says, "Take my wife." Okay, he's asking us to take, or as we interpret it, to consider his wife. That's the premise. And then he says, much to our surprise, "Please." That's the payoff. We were considering his wife, and now you're just to actually and literally just take her. Take my wife, please. Ha 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 ha. Funny. And all jokes have a premise and a payoff just like that. Yours will too. But first you write seriously in your rough draft. Nobody writes jokes in a rough draft. You must first write it all out and then go back and add some mild surprises along the way of the speech, that is. This process is followed by everybody who writes and who writes comedy. I'm not allowed to name names, so feel free to look them up in their writing process, and I guarantee they write just like this. The comedy will come somewhere naturally too, or you can think of it organically, since that's a word du jour. It is not a truly mysterious process. You do not have to retreat to a mountaintop. That would take too much time anyway. You will come to a line about the deceased's life, or something they said or did, or something somebody else said or did, and you will think, what if they said or did this differently? Again, consider your favorite stand-up comedian. Now think that they have been doing that for many years and have received positive and negative feedback on what works and what's funny. Your time is limited. You have a week, maybe, to get all this done. You could read books or take classes, but this is the condensed version. Nevertheless, once you write your rough draft and have gone over it and sprinkled in some merriment in whatever way, shape, or form it is, now is the time to get some feedback on it. Yes, you must show it to somebody before you actually deliver it. Every comedian uses someone to bounce their jokes off of before they actually use them. I did when writing this. I did before presenting my speech at the podium. Every stand-up comedian and every comedy writer does this. The reason is quite simply that not everyone will find what you write funny. That is a universal truth for comedy. Not just about you, but about everybody. You must show your speech to someone else, and it will probably be someone who is close to the deceased to get their appraisal of your speech and the humor you intend to use. When I said the line about my brother's favorite movie was Old Yeller, I got a laugh. I mean, who has a favorite movie about such a sad movie like that? Well, that's the joke, isn't it? Your joke doesn't have to be profound or the greatest joke ever written. It just has to be honest, lifelike, meaning it could happen, and it has to be unexpected, a surprise. You will automatically get the hang of this when you write your draft and share it. The person or persons who read it may offer their own lines instead of yours as the joke, and that's okay. It will be your decision to use it. But if you both laugh at it, chances are others will laugh at it too. Probably not falling over laughter, but that's okay. Nobody wants or expects that kind of laughter anyway. Okay, second part, how you say it. The delivery is up to you and what you're comfortable with. You're reading a eulogy. Nobody's expecting anything. However, you've prepared because you've lived through this for a few days or a week or whatever. You've shared it to a person or a couple of people and have gotten some really good feedback on it. You've been practicing, at least reading it out loud. The worst thing you can do is to read it with a monotone voice and use no inflection in your voice whatsoever. Ironically, that's probably what you've seen more than once and what the audience is probably expecting too. But because of your comfort with the material and your practice, you can give some inflection and meaning to your speech, and by emphasizing certain points, including any jokes. You can always practice this in front of people too. I will emphasize to do this part in front of someone you can trust, because not everyone will be open to this part, or any part for that matter. You will become more comfortable with the material and speech the more you do them. I did. Time is the key, though. Do as much as you have time for. Okay, in summary, let's face it. This is one of the hardest things you will ever do. Honoring a deceased loved one is once humbling and relieving. Relieving because you honored their life and yourself by delivering a heartfelt eulogy. I get it. I've been there. I did it. I still cry over it. But you know what? I could not have stood up there in front of his casket and cried for 20 minutes and grieved all over the place and everybody sobbing too. Okay, I could have done that. I believe, based on my relationship to my brother and all the fun we had in our lives together, and there are far too numerous examples to mention in the speech, that the best way to honor him and me and other family members is to tell some jokes and humorous anecdotes or observations. We even sang a song at the end of my speech, which was Happy Trails to You by Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers was also one of my brother's favorites. I had everyone stand up to sing, and I wasn't expecting anyone to remember the song, only the last two lines, but much to my surprise, the several hundred people there remembered the whole thing. The perfection came when more than a few people in the audience came up to me afterward and told me that it was not only wonderful, but perfectly fitting for my brother. The icing on the proverbial cake came when the head of the hall, where he had the service, came to me and said that of all the eulogies she's heard, and they were quite numerous, mine was the best. I can't guarantee you that kind of success. To be honest, as nice as all that was to hear, I would prefer never having to been in that situation. I know you feel the same way. But deal with it we must. You did your research, you gathered information and stories and memories. You put them all together, organized and structured it, and wrote a rough draft. You went back through and thought of some amusing things to reminisce upon and added them to your speech. You shared your speech with other people and got some feedback. You practiced and rehearsed. You're ready. It will not be easy. You will have to deal with grief or loss as well as the terror of presentation. Maybe you'll cry, and maybe you won't, but you'll do it. You'll get through it somehow, and you'll feel honored for the privilege of remembering your loved one in their life and sharing that with others who love them as well. You'll do good. In the days, weeks, months, years to come, whenever you think of them, you'll remember that it was you that had the bravery and courage and strength and sensitivity to stand up there and tell everyone what they meant in your life. And you'll do it by adding some humorous touches to the speech, at once connecting to them and to everyone. And you can be proud of that. And you'll know somehow they would be proud of you too. Thank you.